So my name is Vanda Rajčanová and I'm a doctoral student in the history at Northwestern University in Chicago. And before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present at this conference and to tell you about Anton Vašek. So I'm talking about retributional justice in Slovak Republic during war, and I would like to talk a little bit about Anton Vašek, who was so-called Jewish king, who was the head of the 14th division of the Interior Ministry. I also talk about his trial. So I live 15 years in the United States, so sorry for my Slovak, but it is how it is. So whether it was intentional or not, the persecution was the #1 Jewish persecution in Slovakia. The persecution introduced documents that illustrated the systematic discrimination of Slovak Jews, including correspondence and directives. Most of these, as we will see, did not involve Anton Vašek. Vašek certainly participated in the Slovak Jewry, but he did not implement any anti-Jewish programs alone. Numerous government officials, as well as an eager Catholic public, ensured quick and effective implementation of policies against the small and defenseless minority. We'll see that Vašek's trial created a different narrative. The persecution portrayed Vašek as the sole culprit and presented him as the poster child for racial discrimination. Anton Vašek was born on 29 April 1905 in Vrba-Wetzler, near Senec, and had been one of the Interior Minister Alexander March's most trusted advisors. In 1938 he was not yet a part of a government, but he had some issues with it before, so that's why he was not a part of it yet. His ex-wife was quite close to Mr. Tiso, and he did not feel very well about this. So, as the formal bureaucrat of Bratislava, he became the head of the Slovak Department of Jewish Affairs on April 1942. So when he came to talk about the National Council, his decisions were quite unclear. He was standing before the judges deemed to seize a lot of racial discrimination, and he was also incriminated for sharing Jewish and Nazi propaganda. And he was prosecuted and executed primarily for his crimes against Slovak Jews. So he was the first high official pursued and persecuted because of this. The Slovak government officials created sort of anti-Jewish legislation long before Vašek arrived at the Interior Ministry. Alexander Mach, Geza Konka and Isidor Koso created deportation plans in March 1942. Because the first transport did not go according to plan, their failures led to major personal changes at the beginning of April 1942. Minister Mach relieved Konka out of his duty because he was not able to carry out the deportations. And he also counted a new official, his good friend Anton Vašek, to the post. He continued his function until September 1944. So this office was mainly responsible for excluding Jews from public life. Prosecutor Shoah basically grouped criminal charges against Vašek into the broad category of racial discrimination. Well, this tactic allowed him to address all charges concurrently, but made court proceedings more difficult to follow. These charges basically compounded three primary responsibilities as the leader of the Jewish Affairs Department: coordination of deportations, supervision of the Jewish forced labor, and issuance of anti-Jewish directives. The first Vašek's responsibility was the coordination of 57 transports to Auschwitz and concentration camps in Lublin between the April 1942 and October 1942. The prosecution reiterated that only 252 of more than 57,000 Jews survived these extermination camps. So whether the decision came from Vašek's superiors or the defendant himself, the transport changed nature once Vašek assumed office. So whereas only able-bodied Jews left Slovakia during Konka's time in office, the policy shifted to include entire families in April. Vašek was not present during all transportations. A trial suggested that he directly supervised at least 3 Žilina trains. Vašek also kept meticulous records at the Ministry of Interior, which helped the prosecution. Several prosecution witnesses documented that the transport included elderly, even people in their 70s, along with children, disabled and insane. It was not logical that the prosecution should move somewhere to working camps. What would they be doing there? Rabbi Frieder posthumously provided the most damning evidence against Vašek and personally blamed him for the deportations. In his deposition, Frieder argued that Vašek could have stopped the trains and sabotaged the plans more effectively and without bribery. The rabbi's deposition also quantified the gross human rights violations and the list of alleged bribes that Vašek accepted from the working group. The prosecution demonstrated that Anton Vašek inserted himself into domestic politics just the day he assumed his new post. Vašek issued a secret memorandum on April 4, 1942, so that local police and Hlinka Guard commanders would number the Jews in their districts. The security section warned the local forces to load Jews on trains in presence of authorized personnel. This document suggested that Vašek was cognizant of the potential public outcry and made provisions to prevent it. Vašek had all the necessary information regarding Slovak Jews in 1942. He summarized the Jewish question in Slovakia in a status report to the Interior Ministry in 1942. Up to the day, approximately 53,000 Jews were transported from the total number of 89,000 from the last census. From those, at least 10,000 fled to Hungary or abroad, or perhaps they are at an unknown location. Baptized Jews, Jews in mixed marriages, and their family members consist of about 8,000 Jews. Vašek's signature on these policies, as well as on dozens of others, suggested that he agreed with the content of these directives. His culpability, as well as his commitment to the Slovak company of the final solution, was quite clear. All witnesses testified to Vašek's exercise of power and claimed that no one was released from the camps without Vašek's approval of knowledge. According to these witnesses, Vašek sustained his threats by invoking unrestricted access to Interior Minister's Mach. Some witnesses confirmed that Vašek met with his boss several times each week and had significantly more access to him than any other department had. The evidence clearly showed that he became one of the most trusted advisors in the year 1942. Vašek seemingly unlimited access also granted him vital information. Therefore, he had or could easily obtain vital information. Some of the key questions emerge in the first stage of the trial are simply stated. What did he know and when did he know it? When did he have direct knowledge of the nature and the operation of the extermination camps? At the beginning of the trial, Vašek claimed that he only learned about the deportations and conditions in the death camps during his trial in June 1946. He quickly realized that this defense lacked credibility and modified his testimony. He realized death camps not earlier than 1943. He knew the evidence in the court's proceedings that proved his perjury. In fact, functionary Kovács testified that he brought him two letters on August 14, 1942. One was in Hungarian and one in Slovak. Both of these documented the absolute terror in concentration camps. He asserted that such letters compelled him to request immediate meeting with Minister Mach.
Tvrdil, že tieto listy ho naozaj prinútili dohodnúť si okamžite stretnutie s ministrom Machom, aby tento
and they wanted to urge him to create a commission to investigate these charges. Pavel Mála said or testified that the defendant knew about the death camps latest by fall 1942. Rudolf Marček also testified to Vašek's knowledge of death camps in August 1942, as it coincided with Vašek's visit to the Žilina concentration camp. When Vašek arrived, he questioned an Auschwitz escapee, Junger. We will hear more about him later in the evening. Furthermore, Nováky labor camp inmate Juraj Špicer testified about the conversation he overheard between Vašek and the camp commander on September 22, 1942. Quote, "We found out the Jews were systematically murdered and it was impossible for them to survive more than 1 year. From this conversation I could only get 2 or 3 sentences," he said. "Even if God intervened, this transport has to go." Marček supervised Junger's second deportation in August 1942. It is quite clear that the defendant knew of the true nature of the sites such as Auschwitz as early as summer 1942. Vašek's defense was contingent on the fact that transport began before his appointment. In 1946, Vašek maintained, quote, "I was subject to Mach. I gave orders that I received from the Interior Minister. I did not order the deportation of the elderly, the mentally disabled, or crazy. Mach gave me this order, and on the contrary, I procured medical supervision for them." Well, in other words, Vašek deflected blame onto his predecessor and superior. Alexander Mach, however, confirmed that he pressured Vašek to accept the appointment and dismissed his fears by illustrating to him a system that was already in place. Quoting, "Initially he was against it, but then he reluctantly accepted it at my insistence. I assured him that he would not do anything out of his own initiative, but would receive orders directly from me or with my permission." Vašek claimed that he wanted to resign on numerous occasions, but functionaries convinced him to stay. Vašek claimed that he acted as a double agent, as both a government official and a friend of the Jews. In his opening statement, he claimed, and I quote, "I was against deportations from the beginning. It was my intention to stop the transport as soon as possible. I first attempted to stop the transport and then slow them down." It took Vašek 6 months to accomplish this policy. He explained, and I quote, "I could not impact policy at that time because I did not have any influence. It was necessary for me to gain confidence from the Germans, Interior Ministry, and other radical groups." From his testimony, it is quite apparent that not only did Vašek have the ability to disagree with Mach, he could do so on major domestic policies and without fear of retribution. In other words, he was not as powerless as he presented himself to be. Second, Vašek could clearly choose whether to stay in the position or resign without the fear of imprisonment or death. Vašek countered this assertion, however, in 2 ways. First, he challenged the concept of individual choice in Slovakia, 1942, especially considering Mach's power. He stated, and I quote, "I received an order and I would like to see a person who, in spring 1942, stood up to Tuka or Mach." Vašek thought he would be deported to Ilava, a concentration camp for political opponents of the regime. At the same time, his earliest testimony revealed that he had already gained Mach's confidence. And he said, I quote, "I had Mach's trust if he appointed me to such an important place." Vašek did not see a contradiction between these two statements. His second argument was that he stayed as the head of the department as a favor to functionaries of the Jewish Central Office. After he later informed Steiner and Frieder regarding his plans to resign, they begged him to stay, fearing that Mach would allegedly appoint a more radical politician who would immediately resume deportations. The prosecution focused on corruption and bribery. And this is where Vašek's moral failing occurred. This is why his name was the Jewish king. Vašek allegedly established a hierarchy of fees which varied from 5,000 Slovak crowns up to 2,000 Slovak crowns. His 7-year-old daughter bought in Bratislava in year 1943 a huge flat in the center of Bratislava. I have no idea how she achieved this as a 7-year-old, but some Jews bought 500 copies of his book, which, by the way, cost 2,000 Slovak crowns. So this is also a way he received bribes. So the prosecution proved that he earned 1,500 Slovak crowns as one of the highest-ranking officials in the Slovak government. But Anton Vašek's gambling addiction was one of the worst-kept secrets in Bratislava in 1942 and 1943. A number of his former colleagues testified that he allegedly used his powerful position to demand payments for his benevolent behavior. Many people claimed that Vašek's lifestyle was unsustainable on his relatively meager monthly salary. Steiner and Frieder documented all of the exchanges as much as they could. Functionaries insisted that they paid Vašek 100,000 Slovak crowns each month not to resume deportations between October 1942 and December 1943. Vašek's attorney, Josef Milo, could not create a legitimate defense. Milo made his client look worse and also highlighted that his client was lying. He reintroduced the prosecution statistics and said that when he was appointed as the head of Department 14, this was his job, so in other words, it could have happened to anyone. He maintained that history would judge him differently once the political scene cleared up and the people would look at his crimes differently. According to Šujan, Vašek not only participated in the state's crimes against Jews, he also benefited financially from these crimes. Careerism, materialism, and the quest for fame motivated Vašek's action. Although the anti-Semitic rhetoric appeared in many of Vašek's publications, the ideology did not appear to place highly in Vašek's motivation. He not only chose to influence the political scene, but also used the Jewish suffering to green his positions. Although this bureaucrat's political career was brief, his actions affected the lives of tens of thousands. So Vašek, without foreign help, decided the fate of more than thousands of people, stole their property, money, and valuables. He became one of the most powerful men of the Slovak regime and exercised near absolute power as one of the closest associates of the Interior Minister Alexander Mach. Although this inconspicuous bureaucrat's political career was brief, from March 1942 and 1942, he really did affect a lot of lives, tens of thousands, if not more. Without doubt, Slovak domestic politics assured Vašek's perceived success in regard to the Jewish question. He unfortunately or fortunately paid a high price for this. Thank you very much for your attention.